The year was 1867, and the Montana Territory stretched wide and merciless beneath a bruised summer sky. Dust hung in the air like powder smoke as the stagecoach rattled down the rutted road, its iron wheels clattering against stone. Inside, Clara Dawson sat rigid, her gloved hands folded tight around a creased envelope. The letter within had been read and reread until the ink all but smudged from her fingertips. Each word had been a promise, a lifeline thrown across the wilderness to a woman who thought her time for hope had passed. She was 34, a spinster by every town's gossip, but in those lines she had found a chance at belonging. "I need a wife," the man had written. "A woman of steady character, strong enough for the land. I can offer a good home." The words had been simple, but to Clara they had sounded like salvation. The coach lurched to a halt in the dusty street of Cold Creek, a raw-edged settlement built on whiskey, sweat, and the constant hum of uncertainty. Clara gathered her skirts, took a breath that trembled in her chest, and stepped down into the glare of the sun. The air smelled of horses, smoke, and freshly turned earth. Men in broad hats leaned against railings, their eyes narrowing as they marked the newcomer. She felt the weight of their stares, measuring, judging, yet her gaze searched only for one face. He stood apart from the others, a tall man in a fine vest and polished boots, his posture stiff with pride. Walter Briggs, rancher and landowner, the man who had summoned her across miles of wilderness. His dark mustache was neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp and calculating. For a heartbeat, Clara let herself imagine the future she had built in her mind. A home of her own, the murmur of a husband's voice, perhaps even laughter by a hearth. She lifted her chin, tried to steady her breath, and offered a tentative smile. Walter's gaze swept over her in a slow, deliberate scan. His expression shifted, disappointment hardening into disdain. He did not move forward to greet her, did not extend a hand. Instead, his lips curled as though tasting something sour. "You're Clara Dawson?" Her voice wavered, but held. "I am, sir. I came as you asked." A silence stretched between them, broken only by the jingle of tack as a rider passed. Walter's face twisted. "You're older than I expected." The words cut like glass. Clara flushed, glancing toward the crowd that had begun to gather, curious for spectacle. She steadied herself, drawing up every shred of dignity. "Your letter spoke of wanting a woman of strength and character." "I—" Walter cut her off with a sharp wave. "I wanted a wife to give me children, not a woman half-worn. I asked for a partner, yes, but one with years ahead of her. You," his eyes narrowed cruelly. "You're too old." The murmur of townsfolk swelled. Clara felt her cheeks burn as humiliation scalded through her. Walter's hand slipped into his vest pocket, and he pulled out a few folded bills, holding them toward her as though she were a beggar. "Here, for your trouble." Her pride flared hot. She did not lift a hand. "I did not cross 1,000 miles for your money." Her voice quivered, but she forced it steady. "I came for honesty, for chance. But I see I was a fool." Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Walter shrugged, dismissive. "Then you'd best turn around, Miss Dawson. There's no place for you here." He turned on his heel, boots striking hard against the planks as he strode away, leaving her standing alone in the dust. The street seemed to tilt beneath her. Clara's heart pounded, not with hope now, but with the sharp ache of disgrace. Around her, whispers began, low voices mocking tones. She heard the word spinster, heard snickers about her gray-streaked hair, the lines at the corners of her eyes. She clutched her reticule, lifted her chin as high as she could manage, and walked away from the crowd with measured steps, though inside she felt herself unraveling thread by thread. The town spread in a haphazard sprawl of rough buildings, saloon, mercantile, blacksmith, all coated in dust and the smell of sweat. Clara walked without aim, her boots sinking into the gritty earth. Families passed by, children clutching mothers' skirts, men with wives at their side. She felt like a shadow among them, unseen and unwanted. At last she found a bench beneath the overhang of the general store and sat, staring at the envelope in her lap. The words she had once clung to now mocked her. A good home. A wife of steady character. All ash now. Her thoughts drifted backward, unbidden, to the farm she had left behind. Years spent raising younger siblings after her parents died, watching her youth slip away while others married and built lives of their own. She had stayed out of duty, out of love, but when the last sibling left, she had turned to find her own chance gone. She had thought perhaps the frontier might still hold a scrap of hope, that some man might see more than fading beauty in her. But Walter Briggs had crushed that dream with a few cruel words. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps she was finished before she had even begun. Evening crept across the sky, shadows lengthening. Clara rose and began to walk again, unsure where to go, the weight of despair pressing against her chest. The town had emptied some, men spilling into saloons, laughter and piano music clashing with the rough calls of cowhands. She turned down a quieter lane, intent on finding solitude. That was when she heard the footsteps behind her. At first, she thought little of it, but the sound grew closer, 2 sets of boots striking against the packed earth. Clara quickened her pace, her heart lifting into her throat. A coarse laugh rang out, followed by a drawled voice. "Well now, what have we here? Pretty thing all alone." She spun, her pulse hammering. 2 men staggered from the shadows, their eyes bleary with drink, hats tipped low. One wore a torn vest, the other a stained bandana around his neck. Their grins gleamed wolfish in the dim light. Clara stepped back. "I don't want trouble." The taller one chuckled, the sound ugly. "Ain't looking for trouble, darlin'. Just company." His companion reached for her arm. She jerked away, heart thudding, fear scorching through her veins. The alley walls hemmed her in, nowhere to run. Her breath caught. This, she thought, was how women vanished out here, swallowed by shadows, forgotten. Then came the sharp crack of a rifle being cocked. The sound split the night like thunder. "Step back." The voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of command. Out of the darkness at the far end of the lane, a man emerged. His shoulders were broad beneath a worn duster, his face half hidden by the brim of a weather-beaten hat. A rifle rested in his hands, the barrel steady and sure. His eyes, when the lamplight caught them, burned cold as iron. The 2 cowhands froze, their bravado leaking away. "We were just—" I said, "Step back." The man's tone brooked no argument. The shorter one spat, muttered a curse, and tugged at his partner's sleeve. With reluctant glares, they slunk away into the night, their boots scuffing against the dirt. The lane fell silent again, save for Clara's ragged breathing. The stranger lowered his rifle, but did not move closer. He studied her a moment, his face carved with lines of hard living, his hair touched with gray at the temples. There was no cruelty in his gaze, only a steady watchfulness. "You best not walk alone, ma'am," he said finally, his voice rough but not unkind. Clara swallowed, her throat tight. I had nowhere else to go." The man tipped his hat, a gesture of respect. "Then you'd better find a place. Cold Creek's got teeth, and it don't take kindly to the lost." She wanted to ask his name, wanted to thank him properly, but the words tangled in her chest. He gave a small nod, then turned, his boots carrying him back into the shadows. She watched him disappear, her pulse still racing. Alone, once more, Clara pressed her trembling hands to her skirts. For the first time since stepping off the coach, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a spark, the sense that perhaps not every man in this unforgiving land was like Walter Briggs. Perhaps the frontier still held surprises, both cruel and kind. And as she stood in that narrow lane, the dust of Cold Creek clinging to her hem, Clara Dawson realized that her story was not yet finished. It had only just begun. Clara rose with the dawn, the memory of last night's terror clinging to her like a second skin. The stranger's warning echoed in her mind. Cold Creek's got teeth, and it don't take kindly to the lost. She had slept fitfully in the corner of the boarding-house kitchen, granted a narrow pallet by the innkeeper's pity. As morning light spilled through the grimy panes, she folded her few belongings back into her reticule and stepped outside into a day that smelled of horses and wood smoke. The town was already alive with noise. Wagons creaked under heavy loads, merchants shouted prices, and men shuffled toward the saloon though the sun had barely risen. Clara kept to the edge of the boardwalk, her chin lifted though she felt each stare like a pinprick against her skin. Cold Creek was not kind to women without men, and after Walter Brigg's public rejection, she was marked, cast off, unwanted, easy prey. She had nowhere to go, no money beyond a few coins hidden in her reticule, and no plan but to keep moving forward. Still, her boots hesitated when she saw him again. The man from the alley, standing at the hitching rail before the blacksmith shop. He was saddling a chestnut mare, his movements efficient and quiet, his jaw rough with stubble. Clara slowed, uncertain, torn between gratitude and the urge to vanish before he noticed her. But he did notice. His eyes, steel gray and steady, lifted to hers, and he inclined his head. "Mornin', ma'am." She gathered her courage. "I never thanked you for last night." He tightened the girth strap, then straightened. "Didn't do it for thanks. Did it because those two needed stoppin'." His gaze lingered on her a moment longer. Then he asked, "You got someplace to go?" Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She felt the shame rise, hot and choking. Finally, she shook her head. The man rubbed a hand across his chin, weighing her. "Name's Elias Hart. I got a place out north, small ranch. You can put up there a while, if you mind. Safer than wandering these streets." She blinked at him, wary. Every instinct screamed that a woman alone ought to tread carefully with such offers. Yet something in his tone carried no hint of Walter Brigg's arrogance, none of the drunken leer from the cowhands. It was simply plain-spoken, like a man offering water to one dying of thirst. Still, her pride bristled. "I won't be beholden to charity." Elias's mouth twitched in the ghost of a smile. "Ain't charity. Could use another set of hands. Ranch don't run itself." He adjusted his hat. "You'll work, you'll eat, and you'll sleep safe. That's fair trade." The words lodged in her chest. To work, to be useful, was a far cry from being cast aside. Clara drew a slow breath. "Then I'll come." The ride northward carried them across rolling plains where grass rippled like water beneath a wide sky. Clara sat perched behind him on the saddle, clutching the edge of his coat for balance, the wind tugging loose strands of hair from her bonnet. Elias did not speak much, but his silence was not heavy. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who belonged to the land itself, shoulders straight, gaze fixed on the horizon. By the time the sun reached its height, they came upon the ranch. It was not large, just a squat cabin of weathered logs, a lean-to barn, a corral holding a handful of cattle. Fences stretched out, ragged in places, but sturdy enough to hold. The place bore the marks of hard hands and harder years. Elias dismounted, tied his horse, and offered Clara a steadying hand. "It ain't Briggs spread," he said, his tone wry, "but it keeps me fed." Clara looked around, taking in the quiet dignity of the land. No fine trimmings, no polished boots striding through, but also no cold eyes measuring her worth. She nodded. "It'll do." Life on a ranch was a rhythm of necessity. Clara found herself rising before dawn to fetch water, gather eggs, and stoke the fire. Her hands grew calloused from scrubbing and mending, her back sore from bending over laundry, yet there was satisfaction in the labor. Elias worked the stock, his shirt damp with sweat as he swung his axe or drove fence posts. He was a man carved by solitude, his movements efficient, his words sparse. But when he did speak, it was with a steady thoughtfulness that settled her nerves. At night, they ate simple meals by lamplight, beans, cornbread, sometimes venison when Elias brought down a deer. Silence often stretched between them, but it was companionable, not cruel. Clara sensed the ghost of another woman in the cabin, the small touches of embroidery on a pillow, the careful way Elias placed a tin cup as though it once belonged to someone he cherished. He never spoke of her, but grief hung in the corners of the room like smoke. Still, whispers followed Clara into town. When she ventured in for supplies, women glanced sidelong, men muttered about the spinster Briggs tossed aside, now holed up with Hart. Clara kept her head high. though each word was a thorn. Elias seemed unconcerned. When one man at the mercantile smirked and made a crude remark, Elias stepped forward, his voice low and sharp as a blade. "You got something to say about her, you best say it to me." The man backed down quickly, and Clara's heart tightened with a mix of gratitude and shame. That night, as she stitched a torn sleeve by lamplight, she spoke without looking up. "You shouldn't have to defend me. It only makes folk talk more." Elias set down his pipe. "Let 'em talk. Words don't break cattle, don't mend fences, don't fill a man's belly. Talk's wind, nothing more." But Clara knew better. In a town like Cold Creek, reputation was as sharp as a knife, and hers had already been cut to ribbons. Still, Elias's steady faith gave her strength. Weeks passed. Summer deepened, the sun beating merciless on the plains. Work grew harder as the cattle needed driving to greener pasture. One morning, Elias hitched the wagon, his jaw set. "River's running high, but we got to cross if we're to keep the herd alive." Clara hesitated, nerves pricking. She had never forded a river with cattle before. Yet she climbed into the wagon beside him, determination stiffening her spine. The drive was grueling. Dust rose in choking clouds as the cattle bellowed, hooves pounding the earth. Clara clutched the reins while Elias rode alongside, shouting commands, his horse weaving in and out of the panicked herd. At last they reached the river, a wide, roiling current swollen by mountain rains. Elias urged the herd forward. The cattle balked, then plunged in, thrashing and lowing as the current fought to sweep them downstream. Clara gripped the side of the wagon, her heart hammering. The wheels struck the water, spray soaking her skirts, the horses straining against the pull. Then came the crash, the wagon lurched, struck by a floating log. The horses screamed, rearing. Clara was thrown sideways, the river swallowing her in a freezing embrace. The world spun, water in her mouth, her bonnet torn away, her limbs thrashing against the current's grip. She tried to cry out, but only swallowed more river. Strong arms seized her, hauling her upward. Elias's face loomed, grim and set, his grip iron around her waist. He kicked against the current, dragging her toward the far bank. Clara clung to him, coughing, her chest burning with fear. They staggered onto the shore, both gasping, water streaming from their clothes. Behind them, the herd scattered, but Elias's men, hired hands she had scarcely noticed before, managed to bring them back under control. Clara collapsed onto the grass, trembling. Elias knelt beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "You all right?" She nodded, though tears slipped unbidden down her cheeks. I thought I was gone." Elias's voice softened just a fraction. "Not while I'm here." That night, by the fire in the cabin, Clara's walls cracked. The near drowning had shaken something loose inside her. As Elias set another log on the flames, she spoke in a whisper. "Do you ever feel worthless? Like the years have taken all that mattered, and left you with nothing to give?" Elias lowered himself into the chair opposite her, the firelight carving lines into his weathered face. He was silent a long moment, then said, "After my wife died, I felt that. Thought the best parts of me went with her. Thought I was just a man working dirt till the dirt took me." His gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. "But worth ain't measured in years, Clara, nor in what others see. It's measured in grit, in what you keep fighting for, even when you've lost near everything." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her that way. Not as a burden, not as a cast-off, but as someone who still held value. The fire popped, and for the first time since leaving home, Clara felt a fragile warmth bloom inside her chest. She turned her gaze to the flames, her heart unsteady. Perhaps Walter Briggs had seen only the lines on her face, the years etched in her skin. But Elias' heart saw something else. Something she had nearly forgotten was there, and though neither spoke it aloud, something had shifted between them. Something fragile as glass, yet strong as the land beneath their feet. As Clara drifted to sleep that night, the sound of the river still roared in her ears, but another sound lingered stronger. Elias's voice, low and steady, telling her she had worth. and in the quiet of her heart, she wondered if perhaps, against all odds, she had begun to believe him. The first frost of autumn clung to the edges of the pasture when trouble came riding back into Clara Dawson's life. She had grown used to the rhythm of Elias Hart's ranch, long days of labor, quiet evenings by the fire, the steady strength of his presence near her. The land had shaped her in small ways, toughening her hands, teaching her to find beauty in silence. She had begun to think perhaps Cold Creek had forgotten the humiliation of Walter Briggs' rejection. But men like Briggs were not easily rid of, and pride, once wounded, had a way of festering until it poisoned everything. Clara was hauling wood to the cabin when she heard the unmistakable cadence of hooves crunching against frostbitten ground. Elias stepped out from the barn, rifle slung casual across his arm, though his eyes sharpened as he caught sight of the rider approaching. The horse was fine-bred, sleek and restless, and astride it sat Walter Briggs himself. He was dressed sharper than ever, dark coat trimmed neat, boots polished, but bitterness had tightened his features, hollowing his cheeks, sharpening his eyes into points of disdain. "Well," Walter drawled, reining in before the cabin, "ain't this a picture? My discarded mail-order bride playing house with the widower Hart." His gaze slid over Clara, cruel as ever. "Tell me, Clara, does he keep you busy at chores, or just keep you warm at night?" Clara's chest tightened. The sting of his words brought back the sting of that first day in Cold Creek, the shame of being cast off. But she held her ground, lifting her chin. "I am no one's cast off, Walter. Least of all yours." Walter's smile was thin. "The town don't see it that way. They're laughing, you know. Briggs rejects a woman too old, too barren, and Hart picks her up like scraps from a butcher's floor. You've made yourself a fine joke." Elias stepped forward, his voice like gravel. "That's enough." Walter's eyes glinted. "Is it? Or are you afraid she'll hear the truth? You're welcome to her, Hart. She'll never give you what a man needs most, a legacy. No sons to carry your name, only disappointment, until she withers in your house same as she did in mine before I sent her away." The words slashed through Clara, each syllable a cruel reminder of all she feared, her age, her emptiness, her worth. But Elias's hand brushed her arm, grounding her. His voice came steady low. "I said enough, Briggs. Leave my land." Walter leaned in the saddle, smirk playing on his lips. "You'll regret crossing me, Hart. This land's too small for both of us." Then with a tug on his reins, he wheeled his horse and galloped off, leaving only a spray of frost in Clara's pounding heart behind. That night, silence hung heavy between them. Elias sat at the table, oiling his rifle, while Clara mended a shirt by firelight. Finally, she spoke, her needle trembling in her fingers. "He's right. I can't give you children. I can't give you a legacy." Elias looked up, his gray eyes steady. "Clara, you've given me something I thought I'd buried with my wife, a reason to breathe again. That's worth more than any name carved on a stone." Her eyes burned. She wanted to believe him, wanted to clutch his words like lifelines. But fear gnawed at her, whispering that Briggs would not stop with insults. She was right. Within a week, the first fire struck. A pasture gone up in smoke, the blaze licking high into the night sky. Elias and his hands fought it with buckets and shovels until dawn, their bodies blackened with soot, lungs raw. When at last the flames died, the herd was shaken but spared. Clara tended Elias's burns with trembling fingers, fury and dread twined in her heart. 2 nights later, cattle vanished, driven off in the dark. Tracks led toward Briggs' land, though nothing could be proved. Elias's jaw hardened, his silence louder than words. Clara knew, then, that Walter's pride had turned to vengeance, and vengeance on the frontier was a slow kind of death. The breaking point came under a silver moon, when Clara woke to the sound of boots on the porch. She rose from her bed, heart hammering, and crept to the window. A shadow moved outside, rifle glinting in the moonlight. "Elias," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. He was on his feet at once, rifle in hand, eyes sharp. The door burst open before he could move further, Walter Briggs filling the frame, pistol drawn. His face was twisted with fury, his eyes wild. "This ends tonight," he snarled. "You stole what was mine, Hart. Time you paid." Elias leveled his rifle. "Put the gun down, Walter. You're drunk on your own spite." Walter sneered. "You think you're better than me? Took my cast off, turned the town against me. I won't be laughed at." His hand tightened on the trigger. Clara's breath froze. Time slowed, the crackle of the fire loud in her ears. She could not stand by and watch the man who had given her safety, who had shown her worth, be cut down by Walter's madness. Before thought could stop her, she moved. Snatching up the iron kettle from a hearth, she hurled it with all her strength. The kettle struck Walter's arm, sending his pistol clattering across the floor. Elias surged forward. The two men crashed into the table, with splintering beneath their weight. They grappled, fists flying, the cabin erupting in chaos. Walter fought like a man possessed, spitting curses, clawing for control. Elias met him with the strength of years in the saddle, each blow driven by grim resolve. Clara pressed back against the wall, heart racing, eyes fixed on the pistol lying just beyond reach. Walter broke free, for an instant lunging toward it. Without thinking, Clara dove. Her fingers closed around the weapon, a heartbeat before his. She scrambled up, pistol shaking in her hands. "Stop!" Her voice rang out, sharp, commanding. Both men froze. Walter's eyes blazed, chest heaving. Elias stood bloodied, his rifle lost in the scuffle, but his gaze was steady, fixed on Clara. Her hands trembled, but she held the pistol firm, barrel aimed at Walter. "No more," she said, her voice fierce. "You'll not bring your bitterness into this house again. I was never yours to claim. I was never yours to throw away. You called me too old, too worthless. But I found a man who sees me, who sees more than years or children or shame. You have nothing, Walter, nothing but your hate." Walter's face twisted. For a moment, she thought he might charge her anyway, that spite might carry him past fear. But then Elias stepped forward, his voice low, dangerous. "You heard her. Leave." The room was silent but for the hiss of the fire. Finally, Walter spat on the floor, eyes darting between them. "This ain't over," he hissed. Yet there was doubt in his voice now, a crack in the armor. He backed toward the door, his shoulders stiff, then vanished into the night. Clara's knees gave way, and the pistol slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. Elias caught her before she fell, his arm steady despite his bruises. "You saved my life," he murmured, disbelief and gratitude woven in his tone. Tears welled in her eyes. "I couldn't let him take you. I couldn't." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath ragged. "Clara, I didn't think I'd ever love again. Thought my heart was buried with her. But you've proved me wrong." Her tears fell freely now, but they were not born of despair. They were born of release, of finding at last a place where she was wanted, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. She touched his cheek, her voice a whisper. "And I thought love was lost to me forever. But it was waiting here in you." In the days that followed, word spread of Walter Briggs' cowardice, of how he had been disarmed by the very woman he had scorned. His power waned, his pride in tatters. The town that once whispered against Clara now tipped hats in quiet respect. Elias's ranch remained scarred from fire and loss, but it was alive, steadied by their hands together. One crisp morning, beneath the wide Montana sky, Clara stood beside Elias in the small clearing by the cabin, vows spoken in simple words, witnessed only by ranch hands and the wind itself. There were no fine trappings, no polished boots or cold eyes, only truth and the bond of two souls who had weathered the storm. As they stood together, Clara felt something she had not in years, belonging. Walter Briggs had called her too old, too barren, too worn. But she had found a man who saw her not as what she lacked, but as what she was, strong, steady, alive. The narrator's voice might well have spoken then, carried on the wind. The frontier measured worth not by years nor beauty, but by courage. And Clara Dawson was proof that love was never bound by time. For the first time in her life, she felt not like a cast-off, but like a woman cherished. And as she clasped Elias's hand, the land wide and fierce around them, she knew her story had not ended in rejection. It had only just begun.